when it comes to resisting the influence of others, knowledge of oneself is very important. If you know who you are and what you stand for, then anybody telling you that you're something else is meaningless. Their opinions are not valuable. Hi, I'm Femi, I'm a political commentator, and here are some questions that you guys have asked me. What are you most passionate about in politics after Brexit? This may not sound particularly sexy, but proportional representation. Right now, we don't have a fair voting system. If you take the last election, you have the Tories getting 44% of the vote and 56% of the seats, Labour getting 32% of the vote and 31% of the seats, which means that Tory votes in the UK count 24% more than Labour votes. And compared to Green votes, Tory votes count 18 times more than Green votes. You can't solve a climate crisis if Tory votes are worth 18 times more than Green votes. That's what I want to fix. How difficult is it to stay positive in your efforts? And is it getting easier or harder as time goes on? Let's face it, we lost the referendum. We weren't able to stop Brexit. Boris Johnson won and he's trashing the country. So it's definitely dire out there. But staying positive, I'd say that I rely on a quote by Martin Luther King, who says that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice, i.e. things will eventually work out. And the reason why I have confidence in that is because if you look at every election since the Second World War, all but 3 of them, the majority has voted for parties to the left of the Conservative Party. So we are a progressive voting country, certainly more than the politicians who supposedly represent us. We've had a more intolerant, more capitalist government than the people in this country for a literal lifetime. So I know that eventually the majority will hold out and we will get a better shape of politics. It's just a matter of time, and it requires, of course, the politicians on the left to actually work together so we can stop wasting progressive votes. Because right now there's basically one party on the right and several parties on the left, which means if you've got progressive views, your votes are split between several parties. And in a system where, for example, if in one constituency 30% vote Labour, 30% vote Green, 40% vote for the Tories, then that means you've got 40% voting for the right and 60% voting for the left, the Tories win. If that happens in every single constituency, then 100% of the MPs in Parliament would be Tories, even though 60% of the population has voted to the left. That's how things are broken. If you got into government and had to select 3 policies on your first day, what would they be? Well, obviously PR, proportional representation, fair voting. Second one would probably be rejoin the EU, so we stop hemorrhaging our economy. And the third one would be either make it mandatory or financially and fiscally, i.e. tax-wise, beneficial to use blind CVs. What I mean is so that everybody who recruits employees has to use a system which doesn't show the person's name, their email address, where they're from in the country, what school they went to, because that would address so much inequality in the UK. Right now, if you've got a Nigerian sounding name, you have to send 80% more job applications to get a call back. That was proven by Oxford University research. That same research showed that if you've got a Middle Eastern sounding name, you have to send 90% more job applications. So we do not have a fair system of employment. And if you have an unfair system of employment, that means that life quality passes through a filter of racism, sexism, homophobia, regional inequality. All those things can be addressed if we have a much fairer system of employment, and that's what I'd put in place. Is the UK rejoining the EU likely or even feasible in the foreseeable future? So if I was the EU and I was looking at the UK, given the entire mess of the last 5 years that we've inflicted upon them, I personally wouldn't want the UK back, certainly not without some serious change, certainly until we started playing by the rules. And right now we're not a country that does that. We clearly have a government that's willing to do whatever it wants, whenever it wants. They shut down Parliament because they didn't like what it was doing with Brexit. They're trashing the rule of law. They're explicitly saying we plan to break international law. So one of the things that I want to do in the UK first is get a written constitution that had actual accountability for the actions of politicians, set limits on what they could do, so they actually respect the rule of law, and deliver a fair voting system so that we can actually have that progressive voice expressed in Parliament so that we'll actually stay strongly tied to the EU rather than occasionally every couple of years being dominated by people that want to pull us out. So I think we need to present a better vision to the EU of what the UK can be, and then I think we can rejoin. But obviously that requires a change of government. Do you feel like the momentum that was seemingly there after the BLM protests last year will manifest into any real change? After that BLM protest, Boris Johnson went on TV and said, "Oh, we want to change it. It's the perception of victimization." Yeah. He wants to change the perception of victimization, but not the actual victimization. He wants to make things look like he's making changes, but he doesn't actually have any interest in actually achieving equality. That's why he waited 8 months to then produce a report that was so bad. The United Nations said that it normalizes white supremacy. It essentially describes slavery like some sort of cultural exchange, talking about how African people remodeled themselves culturally into African Britons. That's what he did with it. So under this government, you will not get the change that you need. That requires a change of government, because we have Boris Johnson in charge, somebody who once said that the problem in Africa is not that we were once in charge, but that we're not in charge anymore. That is white supremacy in its most pure form. So if you want to solve the problem of racism as much as can be done, we cannot have Tories in power. So for example, there's the Lammy report, which was produced by David Lammy within Labour, which means that if Labour were to get into power, things would definitely improve. Now, obviously, we need to make sure they do the right things, but that is a process that will be significantly easier if all votes count equally. And in this country, because Tory votes count more than Labour votes, it also means that white votes count more than black votes in the UK, because black people don't tend to vote Tory, they tend to vote for parties on the left. And how can us everyday folk best support the fight for a democratic and representative government process in the UK, bearing in mind that most have busy lives and familial work and financial pressures? Yeah, I fundamentally get that. I've worked on a campaign where it was very difficult to get people who were representative of the country involved, because politics is time consuming and people have busy lives, and I get that. What I would say is that given that ultimately two men will decide the future of the UK, Keir Starmer and Ed Davey, that's the leader of the Lib Dems and leader of Labour, if they choose to pool the votes of their various parties, if they choose to have an electoral pact between the two whereby they don't stand against each other in various constituencies, then we can get the Tories out of power. Which means that the next question is, how do you get them to agree to that? That requires getting Labour and Lib Dems to shift their policy towards that direction. That means you have to join a party. That's what you have to do. You have to make sure you are working within those parties to get them to a place where they understand that the differences and the tribalism between the two, the rivalry between the two, only helps the Tories. So if you join a party, just make your vote count. It won't take much of your time. There'll be a yearly fee for the party, but it's how you make your voice heard. How do you handle trolling, and what should be done to address online abuse? I don't know if any of you watched Stargate. This is a really, really obscure reference right now, but there is a moment in there where Teal'c says, when it comes to resisting the influence of others, knowledge of oneself is very important. If you know who you are and what you stand for, then anybody telling you that you're something else is meaningless. Their opinions are not valuable. If you've got somebody telling you you're just a shill, you're trying to destroy the country, you just hate this country, you know who you are. The fact that they think different or are claiming to think different is meaningless. So just focus, know your stuff. Make sure you know your stuff, and you make sure you're not bullying with anybody. But know your facts, know who you are, and their opinions won't matter. There is an argument for saying that the ability to directly interact with other accounts online, which is the source of pylons, should come with certain obligations, potentially by specific user IDs that are attached to who you are, but anonymously, so that you're only allowed to basically set up one sort of social account, so media account on one platform. That sort of thing, there is definitely something that needs to be done in that sense, because people are being bullied to the point of suicide. So I think it is something that needs to be worked on. Anonymity is a good thing in terms of whistleblowing, but it also allows for some of the worst behavior on the internet. Why is politics so divisive? Well, I think that's because of the system we live in. Sorry to bang on about the voting system over and over again, but if you know that only one MP can win in your constituency, that means that every other school of thought, every other ideology, every other party is an existential threat to you, because only one of you can go through. Whereas if you have a proportional system whereby you have multiple MPs per area, then that means the number of MPs that a party gets will be based on the percentage of the votes they get, which means you can work together with other parties, people who share not necessarily the same opinions, but at least similar compatible opinions, rather than have a situation where everybody else is kill or be killed. And unfortunately, that phrase has real significance given recent events. Brexit is done. Why haven't you moved on? Why haven't I gotten over it? There are 5 reasons that explain why Brexit can only be an ongoing disaster. 1. All countries trade most with the countries that are physically closest to them. That's why America has that agreement with Canada and Mexico. That's why there's an association of Southeast Asian nations. That's why there's an African Union. That's why Australia gets most of its food from China. This is how the world works. This is how trade works. 2. The biggest barrier to trade is having different regulations, different laws, because if you had to make your product comply with the laws of different countries. 3. That means it will always be in the UK's economic interest to have similar laws to the rest of Europe. 4. The one thing that Brexit guarantees is that because we're no longer members of the EU, we'll no longer get a say on the laws of Europe. 5. That means the UK will permanently have to choose between either intentionally making itself poorer by having different laws to the rest of the EU, or copying the laws of the EU, over which we no longer get a say, in which case we're annoying the Brexiteers who want us to have more control because that's less, and pissing off the very people that put us in this position. That's a disaster, because it's a permanent state of choosing between making Brexit pointless and making people suffer. That's why it can't work. And as for it being done, right now the government's trying to renegotiate the Brexit deal. In 2026, we have to renegotiate fish all over again. We're having ongoing problems with food shortages. And the more we change our laws away from the EU, the worse things get. And in January, we haven't even had proper Brexit yet. It's January when we start having the checks on imports. Things are just getting worse and worse and worse, which means the sooner we stop it, the sooner we get people to a better standard of living. But I've enjoyed that. Thank you very much. One thing that I would say is you need to be very, very aware of the new policing bill that's going through Parliament, because they're basically saying that if you want to protest, it has to be at a certain noise level, which means that basically all protest effectively becomes illegal because you can't know for certain that your protest won't be deemed illegal by the police who happen to be there at the time, which effectively criminalizes all protest. So any rights that the Tories choose to take from us will be even harder to get them back because we lose the right to protest. So keep your eye on that one. Often it's called Kill the Bill. There are lots of protests around this. I'm working with the Guilty Feminists on Noise and Annoying campaign. This is something that's really serious. Thank you.